Hi all. Excited to be here for this session on where we talk about coping with change, especially at this time of COVID-19. A lot of businesses have been struggling coping with this change process. And for me, it's not really, I prefer not to call it change. I think it's more of a crisis than a change process because we've talked a lot about change in the past, and change has never been this severe in many cases. It's really been more of a crisis for most businesses. So, in handling this session, I'd like to look at it from three perspectives. How do you mobilize? How do you stabilize? And how do you strategize going forward as a business? So, when this whole pandemic hit, I think it caught all of us by surprise. We were hearing about it out there in China and other places, but we never really thought that this thing would hit us and hit us so badly. So many businesses were not quite ready for it. And so when it came, it really caught us wrong-footed as businesses. Whether you're a small business or a large business, this was a real crisis scenario, in the sense that people could no longer congregate, people could no longer come to work, people could no longer work in the spaces that we considered safe before, but now we're being told that we can no longer work together closely the way we used to do as teams. And so we wondered, as businesses, how do we go about this? And many of us, many businesses reacted in ways that now, looking back in hindsight, they could have done things differently. So in a scenario where you're having to mobilize for crisis, and maybe this first phase of my talk on mobilization may be coming a bit late for some businesses, but you could take some lessons out of this. In mobilizing during a crisis, it's important, first of all, to come up with a crisis management team. And this team would largely be made up of your team members, your staff. If you have a team, involve them in this crisis process. Involve them in defining what is this crisis and what does it mean for us. What are we seeing? What is happening around us? And what does it mean for us as staff and for us as a business? Yeah. Because when you involve people, then they feel a lot more. There's a lot more buy-in from them in whatever decisions that are made as a result of the particular crisis or the change process. So initially, what I saw with when the crisis hit was some knee-jerk reactions with some leadership teams deciding, okay, we can't meet anymore, let's go home. And it was almost like we continue working as normal, as though nothing has happened. And to some extent, we did see some situations where there was some insensitivity in how people handled that first phase. For instance, I came across a team working in this organization, and they were trying to come to terms with all this crisis, because it was not only a business crisis, it was also a personal crisis and an emotional crisis as well. And they're still trying to come to terms with this, with the children not being in school, with them having to work from home. Yet you have this boss who's asking for results, still asking for results in the midst of all this. So I think that was some of the knee-jerk reactions that people had in the beginning. They just didn't know how to handle this crisis. And then as time went by, they realized that they do need to apply a bit more emotional intelligence in the beginning and involve people through this process. So that is should ideally have been the way in which we should have gone about this had people thought through the crisis, the mobilization phase. So slowly we realized that then people started forming these teams that would then meet and discuss, what is happening around us, and what does this whole change process, what does this whole crisis mean for us as a business. And they came up with some really good strategies on how to address what's happening around them as a business and as staff. So that I think is the first thing. Coming up with a crisis management team that would anticipate whatever is coming up in the future in these times in which we're operating it now, and come up with some plans on how to address the unexpected. The same crisis team then would be used in future or as we go along, and it's I think around this time when people are now starting to have these conversations about returning to work. How would you then prepare as a business to return to work? How would you prepare your space? How would you prepare your people to return to work if indeed you are returning to work? So that is the first, that for me was the first point in managing, this whole crisis. And I guess it would help for you just to take a minute or so just to think through or even discuss what happened in those first few weeks after you heard, there's this pandemic has hit. The government has said that schools must shut down. The government has said that you cannot meet in a room. There was a curfew at the time that was set, and we're still grappling with what was happening. What was happening in your business around then? What were the thoughts that were taking place then? I think it would be a good conversation to have at this point amongst ourselves, just to see how did we manage that point? What did you do as a business owner, as someone who's running this business? And what lessons have you taken from that phase of the crisis? Okay. Yeah, I think we've taken a few lessons out of that session. I'd like us to move now to the next point in this conversation. The next point is really about your people. How did you handle your workforce, or how are you handling your workforce? I think in the first point of mobilizing the crisis, I mentioned that there were some leaders who handled it in an insensitive way. Emotional intelligence is really being called upon right now as leaders for us to apply emotional intelligence as we lead. And this is where we are not only interested in business results, but we also go out of our way to try and understand what are our people really going through. What are our team members going through? What is our staff? What is the experience that our staff is having, both emotional and from a personal perspective? And these are some conversations that I think we've not had. Many leaders may not have had with their teams because it has always been, business as usual. But this is business unusual. And so if one is working at home and they have children who are in school, for instance, and maybe they have 3 children in 3 different classes with no help at all, because in some instances, some homesteads do not have house help at this time. How then do you work with someone like that to still achieve results? And that calls for quite a bit of sensitivity. And so at this time, communication is very key. So communicate. Keep in touch with your people. The other day, I was speaking to a business owner who told me that she's lost some talent at this point in time because they didn't feel the connection, between her between themselves and the boss and herself, being the leader in the team. And people at this time are looking to connect. People at this time are looking for understanding. People at this time are looking for a lot more of accommodating each other. And so, aspect of communicating is important. To communicate to understand, communicate to listen, communicate to appreciate the challenges that people are going through. The other aspect is providing support. What support have you provided for your team members at this time? So the various things that various initiatives that different organizations have taken up to support their staff. And speaking to one of my clients, one of the things that they have done is on a weekly basis, they have a team meeting, an entire team meeting on Zoom, where they connect with each other. And this team meeting has nothing to do with business. It really has to do with understanding or connecting with one another at a personal level. And sometimes these team meetings have games and activities in them. And I was surprised that indeed you can have, you can hold activities on Zoom. You can have, you can play on Zoom. You can have, you can engage in a fun way using, these online platforms. And this has really helped in alleviating stress amongst the team members, in keeping them connected, in keeping them in touch. And it has also demonstrated a lot of emotional intelligence from a leader's perspective. That you can set aside a business agenda and attend to a personal agenda for your team members. So that was quite encouraging to learn and to see. The other kind of support that I have seen companies provide for their team members is is just enabling them to be comfortable and to create a comfortable workspace in their homes so that they can still deliver. I personally had this experience when one of my team members came to me and said, I'm getting backaches, and I don't think these backaches are anything medical. I think it has to do with how I'm sitting at home when I'm working because I do not have a workstation. And it hadn't hit me at that point that, yes, indeed, not everybody has a workstation set up at home to support them to deliver when they do need to work. And so I then had to find a way of supporting this member of staff, providing a suitable chair for him, a desk for him. And since then, the backache has gone away. So organizations have asked staff to either go back to office and pick a seat or a desk, take it home and be comfortable when working, or even provided a stipend for them to buy a comfortable seat to support them from home. The other thing is that organizations have, as part of the package to support the staff, is enable them or provided them a way of connecting to internet from the house if you haven't been connected to internet. For those who have been connected to internet, some organizations are sharing into your internet bill, your ISP, to facilitate you to work at home. So there are various things that you can do to support your staff. An interesting one was the medical scheme plan that staff have had. Some businesses have been struggling, or many businesses have been struggling actually financially, and they were then unable, to continue with a proper medical scheme. And some businesses then went back to the insurance companies to renegotiate their medical schemes, and so that they can be able to still cover their staff during this period, and they had an arrangement where they paid, in installments over periods of time. And in some cases, some financial institutions have actually been very accommodating and provided moratoriums for some insurance policies. So you can renegotiate some of these payments with your providers. And there is a lot of goodwill out there to support businesses that are struggling at this particular time. Some of the larger organizations have reviewed their policies so that they can include a work from home policy. This is something that we hadn't really gotten into as a country. And I think for the longest time we talked about flexi hours, flexi working. Can we have days when you work from home and other days where you work from the office? But not many organizations had actually embraced that way of work. And there were many reasons. I mean, people spoke about the Kenyan culture where, people already don't keep time. And so allowing them to work from home, will they really keep time and will they really dedicate the time to work and perform office duties from home, or will they go out and do their own personal thing? So that commitment aspect. But this whole crisis has taught us that indeed people can work from home and people can still be committed from home. In fact, in some instances, there is a preference to continue working from home. One large organization that I know of carried out a study amongst its staff with over 500 staff. And they carried out a study asking staff what would be your preference going forward when it comes to where you'd like to work from. And majority of staff said that they would prefer to continue working from home. So those are conversations you can have with staff. And you see, when you have those conversations, it then helps you to plan and strategize forward as an organization, both from a people perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, because we're paying rents, and sometimes we've rented large spaces which are now unoccupied. Could you then give up some of that space and save up some of the money? And that money could go into facilitating staff to work from home. So those are some of the conversations that people are having. The other conversation, which is a tougher conversation to have, but at this point in time, we find that staff are more understanding, is the one of cutting staff costs. People have taken pay cuts. People have agreed to take pay cuts, voluntarily done so. And this happens especially when you involve them in the first step of mobilizing during a crisis, where they've been involved in understanding what is this crisis about, how is it going to affect us as a business, and coming up with plans on how to mitigate some of some of what's happening within this space. So I've had clients talk to me about how accommodating staff have been, and some of the proposals staff have placed on the table, so that once this crisis is over, there'll be lesser people who've lost jobs, and organizations will be able to retain people for longer, or retain people for the long term through this crisis. Some of those suggestions, for instance, are people taking a 25% pay cut, or graduating that pay cut over time, depending on how this whole situation pans out. So those suggestions, those proposals coming willingly from staff, then make it easier for leaders to take those kind of decisions, and those decisions have been very helpful to many organizations. So maybe I can take a few questions at this point before I move on to the next session. The next thing that I want us to discuss is the whole aspect of managing your operations during this change, or this crisis, this whole the times in which you're in right now. And your operations could be anything from, if you're a service, if you're delivering a service, how are you going to deliver service going forward? If you're handling a product, what does that mean for you in terms of getting your product to market? For me, one of the most interesting things is to see how Kenyans have quickly adopted to this crisis and have found very innovative ways of getting to their customers, irrespective. And in these times, we've seen, a growth for businesses in very interesting sectors. For instance, the bodas, the delivery services have really grown. They seem almost unaffected by this crisis, or rather, they seem to have benefited from this whole crisis, because whereas in the past people were comfortable just picking things from you in your shop or your business premises, now they're wanting stuff delivered to them, including shopping in some cases. So delivery services are doing very well, and that is one way in which businesses have modified how they operate, because the brick and mortar strategy is not working for many at this point in time. They are finding more innovative ways to deliver their services. So service delivery, for instance, has also had to change, and one of the more innovative ones is this whole consulting a doctor online. Who would have thought that you could actually call a doctor and get treated online? So there's all these platforms that have now surfaced. They were there, but they were basically unknown to us until this COVID hit, and many of us did not want to go to the hospital physically. And so Safaricom has one. There's Daktari Africa as well. There are a couple of them, that people are now calling and having a consultation session with the doctor online, and you get your prescription, and you then are able to speak to your pharmacy to get you your meds and deliver them from at home, all in the comfort of your home. So that has been a real game changer, for many. And the question is, have you looked at your operations? Have you looked at how else can you operate in a more lean way? Because again, finances are a challenge at this point for many. In a way that responds to your customer preferences at this particular time, and in a manner that is responding to what's happening, around you. Another interesting phenomenon that I have noticed is, all these people who are selling vegetables and fruits in neighborhoods from the boot of their cars, because if customers are not comfortable going to the market, then people are bringing that produce to the residential areas, and that's another innovative way of still making your money. So if you have a product that is a mass product, for instance, is there a way in which you can go to market? Is there a way that you can get closer to your markets without your markets then having to leave their comfort to come to you? So just reviewing and reorganizing how you operate and thinking out of the box, because what this crisis is calling for us is to think out of the box. We, for instance, I run a consulting firm, and when we're carrying out recruitment at this point in time, we don't have the luxury of having face-to-face meetings with people, and we've had to adopt to Zoom or team interviews with candidates and meet them online and be able to engage with them and find ways of still, getting to know this person through this medium, in a way in which we can present them to our client. Yeah. So that has been very new for us. I mean, we could have done it in the past, and we have done it where candidates are out of the country, but we never really thought about it when in the times when post pre-COVID, we never thought about it. We never actually considered it as an option. We always wanted to meet the person face to face. So what I'm finding now is that it really doesn't make a lot of difference. Okay, at the end of the day, when you do need to make a decision um, to take somebody on board or to employ somebody, it's important to have a face-to-face meeting, a face-to-face engagement to get to know this person personally. But through the recruitment and interview process, we have had no need to meet with people physically, which has been an interesting way of delivering recruitment for us in the recent past. So the other thing under operations is your supply chain and just reviewing your pricing, reviewing how you package and deliver to your customers, and just this reminds me of a program I was watching a couple of days ago, where this lady who runs a value adding business was telling us how her business has grown. Was saying how her business has grown because she buys bananas from farmers who have previously been exporting these bananas, but now with the export markets closed, they have plenty of bananas in the farm and they are unable to sell them. And so she goes and she buys these bananas from farmers so that at least they can make some money out of them. And she adds value to these bananas and sells them in the supermarkets as either dried bananas in a different form, either dried bananas or banana flour, and those are different ways of still making your income, making your money, by thinking outside the box. Yeah. So whereas sometimes we find that we may be very stuck in our ways, and be very narrow-minded in our thinking sometimes, and it limits us from thinking outside the box to new opportunities, new ways in which we can still be creative and make that money still at the end of the day. So open up your mind, be courageous to do things different, to get into new spaces, new areas that are emerging at this point in time as potential areas for new business. And agribusiness is becoming one of those areas at this time. So that's your operations and to some extent your logistics, the logistics for your business, whether you're in service industry or you're handling a product. The other point is handling finances at this time, and this has been a very critical agenda for many businesses because the cash flows have not been the same as they were pre-COVID for most, and so many organizations have had to re-strategize, have had to review their budgets, cut their costs. And at this time, what makes a lot of sense is to simulate a worst case scenario. Have you simulated a worst case scenario for your business? If this was to go on for another 6 months, would your business be able to survive? Do you have the liquidity to survive the next 6 months? And if not, what can you do now so that you don't find yourself in debt in 6 months' time? And some of these are tough questions to ask yourself or to be asking at this point in time, because we all got into business to succeed. Nobody got into business to fail. But this situation calls for us to think different. And so a worst case scenario, a simulation of a worst case scenario is important in a crisis, because then that helps you to put in place strategies to mitigate this worst case scenario, or to survive this worst case scenario. So reviewing of budgets, because of the unpredictable revenues, is going to be very critical at this point. It's becoming very critical at this point. And also, as you do this, remember that there are certain things that certain costs that are fixed, and ask yourself whether you can do with these fixed costs, or can you do away with these fixed costs, and what does it mean for your business for you to retain these fixed costs or to do away with these fixed costs. Some of the fixed costs are, for instance, your rent. If you have a premises, the rent continues to accumulate every month. You may have a good landlord who has possibly given you either moratorium or discounted your rent a little bit, but still you do have some rent to pay, and that rent accumulates every month if you're not paying it, or if you're unable to meet that obligation. What does that mean for you? Might you want to think about giving up the office, for instance, or finding a cheaper premises for you to work from? And I have seen people leave the office premises in the last couple of months because that is an obligation that continues to accumulate, whether you're doing business or not. So that's one of the fixed costs. The other one, which is a fixed cost that many people have not quite thought about, or may not have thought about until it hit them too late, is your taxes. For instance, if you have staff, there is a pay-as-you-earn aspect that needs to be paid to KRA, whether you're doing business or not. And this is why a lot of businesses in the beginning, at least the bigger businesses, thought about pay cuts, because when staff take a pay cut, it also means that you reduce on your tax obligation to KRA. So there is a tax obligation which you must take into consideration, because that could also come to haunt you in future. Your VAT, if you're charging VAT, just be careful that you're not using the VAT money to run your business, because that is not your money. So those are some of the aspects that you can take into consideration at this point in time when you're reviewing your financial budgets, your financial situation, and your liquidity levels. So that has to do with managing finances during this period of change, this period of crisis, and also just to be a little bit more cautious and not spend as much as you would were you in a normal situation. So to ask yourself questions as to whether you must spend now, or can you delay that expenditure for future. And those are some of the initiatives that are going to see you through this process of change. So I'll take a few questions at this point before I move on to my last point. So I'd like to wrap this up by just talking about strategy and your brand as a business. And this is something that you should try and keep alive even at this point in time. Strategy was never cast in stone. Strategy has to be reviewed based on what's happening around us. And right now, a review of strategy is a key consideration, in the sense that the strategy that you developed in January or December last year for this year may not work at this point in time. And so sitting with your team to review your strategy and developing a strategy that will take you through this whole crisis, this whole change process, is important. And maybe it's a short-term strategy, maybe for the next six months to a year. And that is key, because then it informs performance, it informs the setting of targets for your staff, realistic targets that are not going to demotivate people because you're not working in a normal environment. That is not to say that you should not stretch people to perform. It just means that if, for instance, you are selling 100 crates of beer in January a week, now with restaurants and bars closed, chances are that you may not be able to actually sell 100 crates of beer a week. That may not be a realistic target. So set realistic targets for your people, and the process of strategizing is important. Think about digital transformation. That is a big conversation right now in many organizations across the globe. Delivering digitally, working remotely, all that is pegged on a digital transformation strategy. And where previously maybe you did not have platforms where you could deliver service, online platforms where you could deliver service or products through, or where you could meet staff on, now that is not quite a luxury, and it is a necessity at this point in time. And so a digital transformation which helps you to shift to a remote working environment, both for your staff and your customers, is an important one to consider at this time. So find ways of remaining visible to your customers as well. And again, online platforms, online marketing, digital marketing is key at this point in time for you to remain relevant and to remain in the face of your customers. So I've seen organizations now, embrace some of the social media platforms a lot more, especially if you're dealing with the mass market. Whereas you were never on Facebook, now I see organizations on Facebook or Instagram handles and other digital online platforms. And so think about that you do have to find ways of remaining visible to your customers so that you do not become irrelevant to your customers. Review your strategy also based on your customers' changing trends, where maybe customers before were buying products in lump sum, maybe now they're wanting smaller packaging, and that then gives you the opportunity to review how you deliver your product to the customer. Where customers before were walking in, now you have to go to them. What is your strategy to get to your customers? And where your customers were, were face-to-face customers, now they're online, customers. How do you remain relevant to those customers? How do you engage with those customers? So those are some of the questions you can ask yourself as you review your strategy and you handle your whole digital transformation agenda, ensuring that your brand continues to remain alive for your customers, for your target market, by reaching out to them on the platforms that they are in and they're using, so that you still remain in the face of your customers. The final thing is that I think in this whole process it helps also. I think in this whole process there are so many lessons that you can take out of them, starting from how did we mobilize and how did we stabilize, which is now looking at our current mode of work. How have we stabilized as a business? And that's why that's where I talked about, coming up with or supporting your staff to work from home, or embracing new ways of reaching your markets or reaching your customers. That is reviewing your financial your financial positions and your budgets. That's a whole stabilizing phase of a crisis. And now the strategizing part, where you look at the future. Having gone through all this, what does the future hold for us? So through this whole process, there are lessons that I believe that we can take from it. As I said in the beginning, in the mobilization phase, there were very many lessons to learn from there, from many businesses, and I have seen leaders go back to that mobilization phase and say, this is a very critical phase for us. How did we handle it? If a similar situation was to recur, we would be able to handle it better going forward. So go back and review with your team. How have you handled this whole process? And can you do it better in the future? What are the lessons to take from there that will make you a stronger, more coherent team, or even a stronger brand for that matter, or make you or help you, survive the next phase of this change process. So, sitting back, reviewing with your team, taking the lessons from there, and building those lessons into your strategy going forward is going to be key to surviving this change process now and in future for your business, to build a business that is strong enough to withstand the changes that will come in future. Thank you for engaging with me.